Welcome to WikiFireside Chat episode 3. I'm always a bit confused because we did this primer episode, the counting is a bit wrong because this third episode number 3, is actually the fourth episode of this podcast. But anyway, my name is Philip Kopetsky, and with me is Yop Rangpam.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's Wang Pam. That's okay, Philip.
Yes. I'll get
Yes.
by episode 100. I'll get used to it. Yeah,
Hopefully
I
we get there
promise.
before then.
Yes.
Right.
Me too. In this podcast, we talk about Wikimedia and its projects like Wikipedia and organizational structures and movement strategy that run these projects. In case you're unfamiliar with the complex history of Wikimedia strategy and who the actors are in this process, or like recently, I was talking to someone about there being stakeholders in Wikimedia, but like I'd like to see them as building blocks. That kind of makes it a bit more constructive in a way. And stakeholders, yeah, is more of a corporate term. So maybe the building, like if you don't know who the building blocks are, there's a primer episode in this podcast feed that you might want to listen to. It's the first episode, which is, I guess, episode 0. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And the episode that confuses Philip with his counting, because he starts counting from 1, not from 0. So, okay, just to let you know that what we're sharing today and what we share in our podcast is usually just our own personal thoughts and experiences. And these are stories that are passed down to us in this vibrant movement through different colleagues, friends, partners, associates. And so our conversations are laid back. They're not meant to be exhaustive. They're not meant to be academic. And sometimes we may not have everything. Feel free to reach out to us and let us know what gaps there are in some of our own thinking or what we might have shared, or if there's any type of information or data or something that would be, or additional context on any topic that we discuss. We're here to enjoy the fire and explore this intriguing and complex world of the Wikiverse. So, speaking of the complex world of the Wikiverse, Philip, I have been a little out of circulation for a couple of months now. Please catch me up. What's the latest? What's happening?
Um, that's a good question. Like, there's Wikimania coming up next week.
Whoop.
We're recording this on Friday, August 2nd. Wikimania is literally like days away. Many people will be there, and we'll talk about it later in the episode. And many things have happened in the meantime. Yep. Like we had a ratification process for the movement charter. In the last
Okay.
episode, we talked about the final version of the movement charter.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the ratification, and we have a reaction, we have a counter proposal by the foundation, we have many disillusioned people like who've worked on this strategy process for 7 years,
Oh,
and
yeah.
now that the ratification isn't happening, despite like a really good outcome, there's kind of an open question of what's next, and maybe we'll get to that later in the episode. But
Okay.
Yop, how have you been in the meantime?
Oh, I've been okay. Which I know is like a party line. It's like the political statement everybody makes when you're asked that question. Um, but in all honesty, I thought when I left the foundation, I had said to myself I needed, and I think I shared this with you. I had said to myself I would need time to heal and to grieve the coulda,
Yeah,
woulda, shoulda. Um, but I've become so busy that I haven't even had time to really think about it. But being busy, not just being busy for the sake of being busy, but it's like within my networks and the global development space that I've always engaged in my career. It just seemed like a door was open, and many people who needed my help or needed my strategic guidance on a few things just all started reaching out, and at
That's
different
great.
levels.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been pretty busy, and a lot of exciting things are happening in the world. Some of the things that I'm working on, I think, remind me of many of the conversations that I've had with Wikimedians, and I've called it sometimes connecting with the real world, or touching with, or connecting to the advocacy efforts that others are working on,
Yeah.
or leveraging the Wikiverse to engage with other, maybe it's even thematic focused areas of work, but engaging with them on a different level, not just about putting content on Wikipedia, but supporting advocacy efforts, and supporting by bringing in a lot of the knowledge that is often missing in many of these conversations that people are having, that is just at the fingertips of many Wikimedians. Because people don't always read Wikipedia before they go into high level meetings, but if they just did, there's so much that they could take in there. But
It sounds
anyway, but
familiar.
I'm seeing a lot of that in
Yeah.
my life now. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds familiar that there's a board meeting and no one's read the preparatory documents. That seems very typical for Wikimedia boards as well. Um,
Well,
yeah, um, I mean, yeah, like a lot has been going on, and like I've also been quite busy with other things and a bit stressed out a bit, but it's all good. And I think the way things are going, like it might not be as bleak as it might look right now, because there are always alternatives to a certain situation, and I'm sure, like I'm always optimistic that like there is a way forward that that works out in the end.
I mean, so from a systems design perspective, something will happen. You can either help guide for the best outcomes, or you can guide for the worst outcomes, or better yet, you can build you can build and strengthen parts and pieces within this ecosystem and within this system, so that the best outcomes come out eventually. It's a tricky balance often between guiding specific things and allowing for organic movement in a certain direction. There are things that you should definitely be deliberate about, but there are times when the best course of action is to let go and then build your next step based on the organic alignment, or where there's organic movement. And I
Yeah,
think
exactly.
often those are the tensions that I found when I worked at the foundation. It was really challenging to say to people, hold on a second, this is not the best course of action, because this is the time to step back and allow for organic movement, or enable for organic coalition building. But yeah, anyway, so it's, I guess, I'd love to hear more, Philip. What else is happening? It sounds like the charter is not quite where we had hoped it would be. How
W-
hopeful do we feel about where things are and how the votes happened? I'm especially curious, I guess, about I'm especially curious about the Global Council, and do Wikimedians as a movement see how our different plugs and pieces actually fit. I've often heard us talk about this movement like it's a massive puzzle, with different people moving and leading on different parts, and we're hoping that we're able to plug this puzzle and make it work, when and we feel that some people have control over more parts of the puzzle than others, and some people are controlling more parts of the puzzle than others. So
and
I'm
not
really
everyone
curious
sees
about.
like all of the puzzle, no, like the whole puzzle. That's
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
the issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is someone helping us see all the pictures and the different pieces? I had hoped the charter would be that thing, no?
Like, in a way, yes, it would have been. Yeah. It's kind of, yes, like that's a good analogy actually, because like then like people see the puzzle pieces they have or that they see, and then try to form the next puzzle pieces based on that, and often like they don't fit, and like that's kind of why we are in the situation we are in, because for the last
Hmm.
10 years we've been doing this, and it's not really gotten us anywhere. And the movement charter would have like opened up a way of making that a bit more consistent, and like having a clearer path to like getting to a better overview, and also creating a better sense of ownership of this whole governance structure compared to like how it's run today. You know, like how in the history of, for example, Wikimedia Foundation Board of Trustees elections, um, there have only been people from Europe or North America elected, with one exception, in 20 years. So, like, if there's a change coming, it's obviously like not going to come from like the institutions that already exist, but it's probably going to come from places that we either don't know about yet or that are still forming or shaping up.
Hmm.
And the movement charter would have been like a shortcut to creating that, but like it's not like the only way to approach this. So, but maybe we'll
Right.
get into that like when we talk about the next steps, if there are next
Yep.
steps.
There have to
So
be next steps. In taking the words of Amitabh Bihar in his opening speech during the summit, for massive institutions like the ones that we have, you reach a turning point, or you reach a pivotal point where you have to decide, as the world shifts, as the environment around you shifts, and as movements move, and you're managing change and managing power within that change, you reach a critical point where you have to decide where you want to go. And a few things can happen. You will either die ugly, die quiet, or transform. And I think it has been the hope and the dream of many Wikimedians that transformation is the place where we are. As at a couple of months ago, I felt that ugly a bit. um, and so, in terms of next steps, I would really like to discuss and hear from you what an envisioned future might actually look like as next steps in the middle of the hurt, the pain, the disillusionment, the helplessness or the hopelessness that some might feel. What might next steps look like, and how can that be nurtured or encouraged or enabled without over dependence and over reliance on that power structure? But let's keep going, Philip, not to get
yes,
things
let's start from the
completely.
beginning. So back in
Yes.
2016, yeah, no, so what has happened since last episode is that the movement charter final version was published, and then 3 weeks after it was published, like went to ratification. Ratification was split into three different decision-making bodies in a way. Like one being affiliates who filed an annual report on time. That was kind of like also done in a very laissez-faire way, by like, oh, you could submit like your annual report to the election committee instead of like the foundation, so you're eligible. Because the problem was like that, at least 50% of eligible affiliates had to take part in the ratification process. Which, like, if you think about it, like it's 3 weeks that the chart is known and can be discussed, and then it's 2 weeks of ratification, and in those 5 weeks, like all those different affiliates have to like either consult the community, um, have a board discussion about it and a board decision about it, have to write a public, not, don't have to write a public response, but have to write a public display or like publication that this is happening, that they're, like how they're voting. Like usually that's how things go when you don't do a community vote in your affiliate. So like the time frame was fairly short, and I personally was quite worried that like it was way too little time to like prepare all of the affiliates for that. But anyway, so that's one part of the ratification process. Then the second part is the users of the Wikimedia online communities, um, where there was this quorum put in that like at least 2% of all globally eligible users had to vote. It's a very like rough, like it's a random number to choose. Like why not 1.9% or 2.1%? And it was only like I think in the last few days of the ratification process that we actually reached that mark of 2%. So that was maybe even closer than before, and it was interesting to see like how such a process, like such a ratification vote, would work compared to, for example, the Universal Code of Conduct vote that the foundation instigated essentially, and like how many people participated in that process, and that was about like 3,200 users, I think. So considering like the lack of preparation, the lack of communication maybe from the foundation compared to the Universal Code of Conduct process, these are still pretty good numbers, and it kind of shows that like people were at least interested in participating. And then the third part of the ratification process is the Board of Trustees of the Wikimedia Foundation actually ratifying as well. So they have to accept the changes that come with the movement charter, or like the changes that are suggested by the movement charter, which then someone else would have to implement than the actual foundation. It's like, just to go back to the affiliate vote, Yop. It also like is all based on an affiliate system that doesn't make any sense. Like Wikimedia Germany had the same voting power as the C Spring user group, which basically consists of 4 people, and Wikimedia Germany represents like 105,000 members, and a country of like 80 million people, like 80 million people. So mixing them all together into a ratification vote doesn't make a lot of sense. Like part of the appendices of the movement charter would have like changed that affiliate system, but like trying to set up this kind of governance based on this affiliate system just is very random. But that's just on the side, and like I guess we'll have to deal with that in the future as well. So yeah, does it make sense so far?
It sounds a bit like ad hoc governance in order to create approved governance, and ad hoc governance has decided that there isn't going to be like the system is interesting in a way because the system is not set up to self-govern effectively, but it is set up to run and operate, just not governance.
Yeah.
And the system has not for a long time been set up for decision making, where decision making comes where decision making happens through consensus or happens through consultations. So the system hasn't been set up that way for a long time, and this has become like an ad hoc process. But what I find very revealing is is that the consultations have happened. There is agreement to a big extent, but there isn't a ratified charter, which means that the ad hoc governance system has decided that there isn't going to be a consulted governance system, or a governance system that's set up by consultation.
Yeah, it kind of feels like when like big communities vote, for example, for visual editor, like should visual editor be used on this Wikipedia? And it's usually like people who don't need the visual editor deciding if newbies and like other people should be able to use a tool like the visual editor. And it feels like the same here is like the organization that like doesn't really benefit from this. Um, I mean, it kind of does benefit from it, but that's a different story. But like, they are deciding about something that like should be like the counterpart that they're looking for. Like they constantly like the foundation is constantly looking like to get a mandate from the community or like get the voice of the community, and the global council and the movement charter would have been a way to like at least like attempt to have that representation. But now the foundation doesn't want that, so it
It,
it
it
kind of
it
yeah.
seems, although in I guess in times like this, because I'm looking at the numbers. If you have communities voting at 1,700 that voted, and maybe
Voted
forty
yes.
percent say, oh, okay, 1,700 voted yes. So you have over 2,000 who did vote,
Yeah.
and more than 70% say, yeah, we like this. And then with the affiliates, over 100 voted, and 80% of that 100 voted a yes. The question is, why do you not have a ratified charter? And I've seen it broken down. I can understand that there are bits and pieces and components of the charter that might be major contention points.
Yes.
The question is, are these votes voting against the entire charter because of one contention point for them? Or is it the entire charter for the no votes? Or is it the entire charter that they voted no to? Is it the charter in concept, as a concept, that people are saying, no, we
They
don't want?
There's actually a list of like the comments that people left while voting, and obviously people feel a stronger need to justify the no vote or like why they vote no, and like many of the comments evolved around like creating like a bureaucratic, like almost like a second foundation, and like creating more bureaucracy instead of like actually spending money on the things that matter, you know,
Okay.
like
So the part of the
it.
charter then that's in
Yeah,
big contention would be the setting up of the Global Council.
correct. Yeah.
Okay. Then that means that every other part of the charter is good.
I mean, yeah, like no, I think it's not really worth like over interpreting the ratification result. Like
But
I'm
why
sure
not?
like many people didn't read it in detail. Some people probably read it in detail and felt like it's either not going too far. Like that's also like why many affiliates didn't vote for it or abstained because they felt like it didn't fulfill the things that they actually wanted from the movement charter.
Okay.
Um, So I think just like what you can take away from the ratification result is that there's a consensus to like move forward on this, like actually have some progress and not like be stuck in the situation we are right now, because it's just like many people have been sticking around because they felt like this strategy process would like finally get them to the point where working in Wikimedia, like either as a staff member or as a board member or as a volunteer, um, wouldn't be as like exhausting and nonsensical as it often is, you know.
Right.
So like not having that kind of like means like yes, this will take another like 2 or 3 years at least until we have something similar. Um, I'm not even talking about like what the foundation is, what the counter proposal of the foundation is, but just like trying to get to a place where we have this kind of like community representation again is going to take a long time if it's not done this way. But maybe that's
Okay.
the next steps. I'm not sure if it's like worth going into the reactions. Like, there's one very strong reaction from a board of trustee member of the foundation. It's really even difficult to describe what the
But
issue
it's a
is.
personal reaction or a personal response to it. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's also unclear where this reaction is. Like, it's a really strong emotional reaction to this, and I'm not quite sure where this is coming from. Like, it's either like, and whether the board of trustees didn't expect this kind of like clear ratification result. Obviously, like with the board of trustees already saying like in advance that they're not going to ratify it, like the liaisons recommending to the board to not ratify the movement charter that might have influenced the ratification votes as well. Like either in terms of like motivating people to actually vote for it because the foundation is against it. The board of trustees or the foundation now feels that it's like on the wrong side of the argument, maybe. Like it's not on the same side as the affiliates and the communities. Maybe now they're trying to find explanations as to how this happened, and like obviously it's easy to blame the affiliates to be coordinated and like this being a power grab by the affiliates. I wish the affiliates would be as coordinated to be able to do that, because that would mean we'd be able to do other things as well together. So it's just completely nonsensical. Like it takes so much time and effort to like create certain structures and hubs, for example, that like getting everyone on board to like do a power grab in this sense, like especially like with a movement charter drafting committee that is not beholden to anyone to a fault. Just like like feels very, very like taken out of thin air. And then also like insinuating a communist revolt, seizing the assets and spending them now instead of thinking about the medium and long-term future. I wish the foundation would have a long-term future plan sometimes, because that would make things easier. um, Of course, now people are suggesting all kind of things because like this thing has failed, so maybe let's look at this other thing. When maybe right now is not exactly the time to just move on and talk about the next thing if we can't even figure out why this thing didn't work out. There was a
So
swan
in the
meeting.
meantime, it is
Sorry.
business as usual.
So the foundation has offered like a counter proposal to create a global distribution committee.
Distribution, like a funds distribution committee.
Let me just find this. Establish an experimental. Okay, like so 7 years into the strategy process, we're talking about experimental committees, and this one is the Global Resource Distribution Committee, GRDC, which is supposed to be put together like out of like regional committee members. So the way currently like the foundation has set up the process of like awarding grants is they have created like these regions. Some of these regions don't make that much sense. Like there used to be like a whole Africa region where North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa was mixed together. And Central and Eastern Europe is mixed together with Central Asia, which makes a sense in a certain way, but it's just like those regions were created like in 2020 on a temporary basis, and now they're kind of like set into stone in a way by like doing this. But anyway, like this global committee of resource distribution will then be filled with people from the regional committees, and the regional committees will be selected by the communities of that specific region in however way they see fit to like organize that regional committee. It's very reminiscent of the old like funds dissemination committee that the foundation had, that would decide about like annual plan grants of like the biggest affiliates in Wikimedia. It was like the FTC also sometimes reviewed like the Wikimedia Foundation budget, and also Wikimedia Germany, for example, who right now are like not accountable to anyone really. So like compared to the old FTC, like this new committee doesn't really have that much power in a sense, and it just like it's still like just like distributing funds that like it gets from the foundation, and the foundation still decides like how big those pots are, for example. And
So,
still yeah.
this is the part that sometimes I think gets me with our movement, and leaves me often a little confused, because it is. I have said this in so many different ways, and I don't know how to. I struggle to find the best illustration other than just saying it as it is. But our movement is an ecosystem. It is a system. whether it is one that was pre-designed or not. But there are parts, there are pieces, there are institutions within our movement. There are mechanisms for delivering on these different institutions within this movement. There are bodies within our movement. There are different actors. There are different levels of engagement and all of that. So we have this behemoth of a system. And there is absolutely no decision that's made in any part of this big puzzle that does not affect the other.
Yeah.
And for some reason, we tend to double down on certain parts and pieces and provide a solution there as opposed to thinking a little more holistically, which for me was very frustrating, that I would try and say often, we need to take a systems lens and understand that there's a decision we're trying to make here that's going to affect this other part. And so let's understand, or at least even if we're making recommendations, we have to make recommendations recognizing that the result of whatever action is taken will affect other parts and pieces. And in that recommendation, we should either call out our understanding of how this decision is going to affect the other parts and pieces directly connected to it or not, and just recognize that. I find it not so. Here you have a charter that tries to take this systems lens and say, here are the different parts and pieces, and to enable for these different parts and pieces to work, we need to clearly define roles and responsibilities. Things are getting a little messy because we have a lot of people doing a lot of different things, and it's not about controlling what people are doing. It's just saying we need to be coherent as a movement, and we can't continue like a cacophony of people just going on and on. And so when now the proposition is, oh, here's how we redistribute funding. Funding is not a silver bullet. Sorting out your funds distribution problem is not a silver bullet to sorting out the myriad of issues that you need to figure out within the movement. It's not going to give us that coherence, which is what the movement strategy was trying to do, to say, we recognize and we understand that there are different players and there are different actors and there are people who care about different pieces. There are institutions within our movement and there are bodies within our movement. And often we have set up these institutions, we've set up these bodies, and we've set up these committees in response to an immediate need as we were going and as we were moving. So now we have all of these different parts and pieces. How do they actually function as one piece, as one system? So I find it really challenging, Philip, because we cannot talk about funds distribution without being clear about the roles and responsibilities of affiliates within our movement
Yeah.
or hubs or AFCOM. And we cannot talk about the distribution. We cannot talk about the role of AFCOM and affiliates and hubs within our movement if we're not talking about what our principles are within these organizations. Like,
Mm.
you know, how do we determine what distribution is supposed to do? Movement strategy says it needs to happen with equity. Okay, that's great. But what does equity mean for our movement?
Yeah.
Because equity in our movement, right off the top of my head, it means in some cases empowering some affiliates to go ahead and do fundraising, but on the other hand, ensuring that other affiliates who cannot do that fundraising have access to the resources they need to operationalize their work of growing the movement in their countries or in their regions. That's what equity sounds like to me on some level. So if we say funds distribution, how are we doing it? What does that mean? And
Yeah.
what is the teeth that AFCOM has to ensure that we have these strengthened institutions that are delivering for the movement? It I don't know, it frustrates me often. And maybe you can hear that frustration in my voice, but for
No,
the
like I feel
movement
the
charter,
same. Yeah.
it would be amazing to see a charter that if we have to take it apart and say, the charter gives us a picture of our movement. It answers a number of questions, and we're happy with these answers. But
Mm.
there are contentious points. The Global Council, we need to know what the Global Council is and principles around which the Global Council is meant to run and operate. And within that, a better clarification of roles and responsibilities so we don't have duplication. That's fantastic. So let's take that piece and uncouple it. Let's take that piece out and say, for other parts of the charter that we're agreed on, if we agree on the roles and responsibilities of affiliates, hubs, and we agree that we should have these different levels within the movement, like user group, affiliates, chapters, if we agree that there are different limits or there are different levels, if we agree to that, if we agree again that what's the other part of the charter? Okay, and then we don't agree about funds
Well, the values
distribution.
and principles, yeah.
Right. So if we agree on all of those, if we agree on certain salient pieces, let's say we agree on those, and those are not to be reworked. Because in thinking about the future, if we go back to rewriting that, that's work. And probably unnecessary work down the line. But I could be wrong, and I take this as being potentially wrong. One thing I learned being in the movement is that every day I learned something new, and every day I realized there's a lot more that I don't know. But
Yes, that's the main lesson of Wikimedia. Like, you always know
yeah,
less than
but
you
one
did
thing that I
before.
do know, Philip, is that sometimes a decision on one hand that is beneficial to a certain group can be the polar opposite to another group.
Yeah.
And making decisions without recognizing that the outcome of that decision can have varying effects or different results is the most dangerous thing we can do to our movement. And I'm hearing some of those decisions and I'm seeing and reading some of those and just thinking it's still not a coherent movement. It's still not a movement with different parts and pieces that recognize, appreciate, or respect the lived experiences of others. And it's saddening, I guess, on the one hand, but also really interesting to watch from a systems design perspective.
Yeah, I mean, like, if when I compare it like to, like even 10 years ago, like, I think we have gotten quite a far away in terms of like having more people involved, like, and having a broader like array of views and opinions
Oh,
involved in
that's
these
good.
conversations. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's obviously still not enough. Like, it's still not enough to actually make enough people understand like that this is necessary. It seems, at least like on certain committees or boards. But yeah, like, I agree. Like, the recommendations were never written in a sense like, yes, let's just cherry pick some of them and not do the other ones. Like, as you mentioned, like, you can do funds distribution, but without the right leadership and the right capacity to receive those funds and actually use them in a efficient way, an effective way, it makes no sense to do that funds distribution. Like, you could argue, oh, yes, let's start with funds distribution. Let's start throwing money at people, and maybe something will happen. But like, as we've experienced, like in certain regions of the world, like, that's not exactly how it works,
No,
and it's not
no,
a sustainable way of doing this.
no.
And some teams at the foundation have realized that and have started trying something else. But there's no grand vision or anything about like how this is like how are we gonna until 2030, how are we gonna implement actually all of those recommendations? Like, what is the grand plan to address all of those recommendations into them? Where's the grand plan as to like what are the building blocks we need? And if we all agree that the movement charter is like one of the foundational building blocks, why are we messing around with it for so long? And like, when this movement charter process started like 2.5 years ago, there were quite a lot of people who were vocal about like iterating on ideas and fine tuning it so that like at the end of like a 2-year process with like maybe 5 or 6 iterations would get to a point where like most people would be happy with it. But now it's like more like a big bang approach where like, okay, it has to be now after 2.5 years of talking about it. And like, it seems like certain uh, building blocks or stakeholders have not been taken into consideration enough, although I'm really mystified as to how the foundation was not involved enough to like see this coming. But it seemed like there haven't been enough discussions or like honest debates about this to actually make this work. So to me, it also feels like there's not such a great commitment to actually making all of this work. And the counter proposal by the foundation also insinuates in a way that like we want you to do something else, and we want you to spend your volunteer time on these committees, and we'll just do the same thing we've been doing for the last 15 years.
Well,
Um,
yeah, that's
but
that's potentially the challenge of moving away from organic growth into more structured growth for the
yeah,
movement. It could be considered teething problems towards a stronger movement in the future, but it's that stronger movement also needs it needs to happen through thoughtful and considerate decisions, I
yeah.
guess.
I wish the process wouldn't be as painful. Like, yes, we are getting somewhere, like we are realizing things, but it's just like it could be a bit less painful, maybe, to get there. Like, if we talk about what's next, like there was a strategic Wikimedian alliance network. I think like the abbreviation is SWAN. So like there was a SWAN meeting last Sunday about this topic, and like we had an hour of discussion with the foundation, and then the foundation people left, and we had like a internal, air quotes, internal discussion, just like affiliates and community members. The realization was in a way that like if we want to see some change, like we actually have to do it ourselves. Like there's no point in waiting necessarily for someone else to do it or like start the process. Like we actually have to proactively shape this to then demonstrate like this can actually work.
Mm. And who's we, the members of SWAN?
Well, so there's like
Or
it's
everyone who's
usually
at the
Wikimedians
SWAN
from
meeting?
like
Yeah.
usually like all over the world, but obviously like it's the same as always. Like it's very North American, Europe heavy. There was a second one, like, or the first one was actually like a more Asia time zone centric meeting, but like there weren't that many people at that compared to the one that's like more focused on the time zones of Europe and North America. The we is a good question. I think like that's something that people will discuss at Wikimania as to like what that we actually is and who is involved in which way. But I think like everyone who still has the energy to like work on these things will probably work on it in a different way than they've been doing so far.
Okay.
Um, so there will be probably some change coming. It's just like the question, like we kind of now have to self-organize in terms of determining what the change looks like and like or like what that path looks like. And I think with the C Hub, for example, we have like a bottom-up process that has worked in some ways, and maybe the question is like, okay, if we had a similar bottom-up process in every other part of the world and had like regional networks that like are like where the communities feel ownership of the regional network, and what happens if we then like all coordinate those regional networks to like create a global governance body?
Mm-hmm.
But maybe that's the long way around, like maybe that's the way of doing this actually the proper way, because you're building out the foundation for this like global council to be on top of, instead of like having a global council without any structures beneath it. And I
Right.
think that's some of where the doubt comes from right now, is like the feasibility of creating a global council but not having the regional or local structures in place to actually make it a truly representative body.
Mm-hmm.
Although the charter did like outline how there's certain requirements to creating the global council, and like it can't just be dominated by certain regions, for example. So, but yeah, like I think that might be a way forward of like building it from the ground up. But like obviously that's going to take way longer, and it's just a bit disheartening that we can't take a shortcut by doing this.
No,
Um,
there are no shortcuts to building a strong movement a strong global movement with that is
Yeah.
multicultural and that is as multicultural and as diverse and even multidisciplinary as our movement is. So yeah, there
Mm.
are no shortcuts. There will be no shortcuts, and there's
Yeah.
got to be some smart decision making happening in there, especially by those who are able to see the lay of the land, who are able to see all the different puzzle pieces and guide, usher, and support, while also encouraging organic movement and allowing for that to happen. But it's like we said earlier, that's it also takes a certain type of institutional character to be able to do that effectively, and whether that exists or not is a big question.
Yeah, and the time and resources to do so. Like maybe that's a segue to Wikimania, because there will be some sessions at Wikimania that will maybe have a look at that, like those
Awesome.
aspects.
Okay. What sessions? On what days are those sessions happening?
Yes.
I would be curious to at least just get tips and highlights during those sessions and see what comes out of them. Yeah.
Um,
I'm call it my own personal PhD where I have these massive research questions from a systems design perspective, from the person who's deeply involved in strategic conversations for institutions that do a lot of global work, country offices of these global institutions, and sometimes build coalitions, like global coalitions, that are also thinking, how do we set up a secretariat that enables us to do our work more effectively? Or when you're in conversations with governments who are trying to figure out how to bring in different parts, players, and pieces and make decisions more effectively. So I have a big PhD question personally about how does a global movement build coherence and shared understanding?
yeah.
And I'm closely watching and listening and paying attention. So, for that reason, I'm curious about what happens at Wikimania and how the conversations pan out eventually.
Yeah. I'm also curious about that.
Okay, tell us about those sessions, Philip. Tell us about the sessions.
But
I'm taking notes.
um, so I take notes. Okay. Um, maybe like some aspects were interesting about this Wikimania. Like it's the first Wikimania in Europe since the pandemic.
Oh,
Which
okay.
will be interesting to see. There will be like about 1,000 people expected in Katowice in person, and
Fantastic.
maybe a similar number online, maybe fewer. But it'll be like a pretty big conference, and it will be quite chaotic in terms like chaotic, but maybe overwhelming. And finding the people you actually want to talk to will not be very easy if you even know who you want to talk to. So.
Right.
Um, just maybe as a survival tip for Wikimania, if you meet someone, you want to talk to them, just talk to them right away and not agree on meeting later, because that meeting later is like those
Not
meetings rarely
guaranteed.
happen.
I know.
um, yeah,
Happened to
and
me.
just not expecting too much.
Right.
Like it's funny to see like all these like sessions being planned, but the reality is like there's so much going on and you're being pulled in 5 different directions all the time. So getting the right people into the right room at Wikimania is
Mhm.
almost impossible to do. But we'll
Right.
see. Like maybe people are more disciplined now than they used to be, and might actually like be more focused on certain outcomes. It's quite funny, like trying to explain to people who've only been to the C meeting, for example, like because the C meeting is a very like focused and work heavy and outcome heavy conference with
Okay.
like very focused conversations and very pinpointed like deliberations and workshops. And Wikimania is none of that, because like you just have people from all over the world, and like they don't know what you would be interested in. They're going to explain something from their point of view. But if it's
Hmm.
actually anything of interest to you, is something you'll only find out like during the presentation or the workshop. So
Oh, yeah.
it's a lot of like hit and miss in a way. But that's Wikimania, and it's always been like that, and it probably will always be like this. Which for some is fine. Like, like not every conference has to be super goal oriented.
No, no. And I mean, I attended one Wikimania, and the sense that I got was it was um, it was more about there was a lot of camaraderie and a lot of engagements. And
Mm,
I said to one person who asked me, "So your first Wikimania, how was it?" And I said, "The Wikimania actually happens in the corridors and not in the conference rooms."
yes,
Um,
but that also creates like a kind of like a class system where like if you know enough people and you have enough connections, like you will not spend a lot of time in the sessions because it's just like talking to people all the time. And if you don't have that, you're kind of like attending sessions and that's kind of it. Like you're not really getting a lot out of Wikimania in that sense.
mhm,
And it also
mm,
carries on into like the evening activities that people
yeah,
have.
yeah,
Like that
parties.
is quite selective, yeah.
That,
Um,
that's true.
so, and I'm not sure if like anything. So it's nice when like the our Wikimanias were like more inclusive, like evening activities are planned. But we'll see how this works out this year. So anyway, going to the sessions. So the first day of Wikimania is a Wednesday, um, which to someone like me who's been to 7 Wikimanias all before the pandemic, and they all started on a Thursday, this is very like unusual, and you really need to get used to the idea that like, sure, Wednesday is the first day of Wikimania because we can't start early enough with all of this.
Right, right.
um, so on Wednesday, there is a session about looking to the future of affiliate gatherings, what comes after the Wikimedia Summit. Now
Okay.
you could say like nothing, or you could go to the session and maybe work on, and that's kind of like what we've been talking about earlier, Yop, is how we kind of like now have to talk about the future of all these things because it's all so unclear now, and we have to look at it from a
Right,
more systemic or like holistic approach in terms of like
right,
seeing as much as possible and then trying to form or plan these things in a way that like encompasses as much as possible.
right,
Um,
right,
Obviously, that also makes it more difficult to actually implement it because you need to spend more time and need to be patient and also keep the interest of people who are like right there at the beginning and saying like, yes, let's do this and not wait for others. So that's definitely something that I learned in the C Hub is like, yes, like let's do this, but like also let's not like rush ahead and not think about this like in a reasonable manner that like make sure that like everyone who wants to be involved can be involved, and
mm-hmm,
that's
mm-hmm.
probably like a quite a useful principle for the next whatever comes after the Wikimedia Summit. So anyway, like that's a very interesting session, and then there is a session organized by someone from Latin America about regional hubs within the Wikimedia movement, opportunities and challenges for open collaboration.
Oh, from the Latin
Um,
America community.
Correct.
Oh, okay. Who's
Um,
hosting that?
That's a good question. Like it's been changing over the last few days, so it's like a bunch of people. It's also like people from ESEAP and from CE and from Africa, I think, from the West African hub and from the East Africa thematic and regional hub are also
Okay,
involved in that.
okay, okay.
Um, that's kind of like more of a roundtable of like discussing things, and then on Thursday at 10 o'clock is the session that you and I were supposed to do.
Right.
That's how things change.
Life
And
happens.
um, yeah, that feels like 4 years ago at this point when we were discussing this.
When we're discussing this, right? So that's the
Um,
future of grassroots
and
organizations in Wikimedia and the role of hubs in that.
correct. And I rewrote the title like after the movement charter ratification results came out because I thought like, okay, like the original idea doesn't make a lot of sense. We need to open it up a bit and not only talk about hubs, but also like everyone and like how a bottom up approach should work in Wikimedia. Like, what do we need to do for this? And you can kind of
Uh-huh.
imagine as a project kickoff in a way, like start like creating the sense of like, we need to work on this together. We need to like push like each other and like hold each other accountable in a way,
Right.
because
Yeah.
no one else is going to do it. Like
Hmm. Hmm.
the
Hmm.
foundation doesn't want to touch the hubs like with a 10-foot pole, it seems, in terms of like trying to manage them or like put some rules in place. So I think
Is it? Well, yeah. It's the first question is, it comes back to that systems lens
yeah,
thinking. Because the good thing about hubs is that you can't touch hubs without recognizing the rest of the system.
correct.
And when you're not interested in the complicated conversation and you just want to take a simple piece and say, here's a solution for this piece. It's here's a solution for this topic. And I have a solution for this topic. You can't do that with hubs. So when you're reticent to take a systems lens approach to anything, you will think that hubs are actually complicated and not want to touch it. That is what I experienced. Um, so and with hubs, I think it's important to recognize, to be able to support. You need to recognize and appreciate the role that hubs players have within this system, and how with hubs. I'm trying to think of the best way to put this, because one of the most challenging conversations I've had is trying to help folks understand that if we don't support hubs at a certain level, a minimum number of hubs that cover the regions that we support, at the very least, at the very minimum, if we don't support that, then we're saying that we don't recognize a global governance movement. We don't recognize global governance and a self-governed movement, and that we're not willing to support it. Because in this ecosystem, hubs set up in the way that we have in the hubs guidelines, where it is about supporting grassroots communities, it's about supporting and delivering services that are designed from the bottom up. Um, if we do that effectively, if hubs are set up and run effectively, what we then have is almost an organic generation of effective representation for our movement. And that effective representation will show up in the right places, in the right spaces, because the voice that then comes out is strong and it's clear about, these are the services that I'm providing. As a hub in East Africa, I'm supporting Swahili speaking East Africans. I'm supporting East Africans that are new to the movement. I'm building partnerships and more connections with organizations and institutions in Africa who support open knowledge. And so when you're drumming up policies and things and you're talking about funds distribution, by the way, I can say that for my communities, I'm not able to fundraise. The partnerships that I'm building will just take a bit of time. And so when you say I should go fundraise on my own, it's just not possible now. And so you have to rethink that support or how you enable East Africans. And I'm using East Africa as an example. So you have to think, we have to have a different type of conversation about how you enable us. And it's not just saying, go ahead and fundraise. Of course, we can go ahead
Yeah,
and fundraise. But you need to recognize our challenges and our barriers and how best to support us. So that voice that's able to bring that clarity into a high level, I'm using high level for lack of a better term now, but that voice that's able to bring that clarity about those needs and the expectations into a conversation, it needs to be nurtured and grown through the hub system. The challenge has been appreciating that, and appreciating that that work is the messy work of actually doing equity. That is the challenge. Just appreciating that and saying, okay, let's do this. And let's not be performative about how we're doing it, but let's be real about
yeah,
doing it. That, Philip, was the most difficult conversation I've had. It ended up with being told that I was spinning my wheels, and it just became really difficult. So I would be curious to see how we end up truly supporting hubs down the line and how we build that strategic support. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
and like that workshop on Thursday at 10 o'clock is kind of like there's also like create this joint understanding and like that we like that hubs are support structures and not governance structures. Like I
Hmm.
think that's
Hmm.
really important to underline because the foundation is like pushing at least the C hub in the direction of like why don't you make all these decisions, and we having
No,
to explain to the foundation that like we are on the other side of this argument, like we can't like support communities and affiliates in writing like grant applications and then review those grant applications.
no,
Like sure there's a way of like creating two tiers in the C hub that like one like helps and one like judges, but from our point of view like the whole distribution system should be set up differently and not like in a more
exactly.
participatory way and not like just handing down like okay this is the C budget that we have and we have to deal with it.
No,
And you know like the same way people are angry at AFCOM for making decisions, but like the truth is that if AFCOM had more resources to actually address problems and situations in a reasonable and timely manner, people wouldn't be as angry at AFCOM. So it's also a lot about like what kind of resources do we have, and like also when you know when the foundation asks about like making those decisions, we then point out okay like if you actually want us to make those decisions, we also need the time and resources to do so. Like we can't just drop our normal programs just to like fulfill your governance needs. And like that's
right.
usually when the conversation stops, because like when it comes to like oh we need more staff members to do this, like that's suddenly when the conversation just like dies and there's no
Okay,
further
sure.
conversation about it.
No, but you're not speaking the right language then. So of course the companies. I
Yeah.
mean, at that point,
Anyway,
I mean, the Tower of Babel came up. If you get that reference, if you don't get that reference, my apologies. Um, um, I heard that one time in a conversation with a friend. I found it very interesting because it makes a lot of sense. We're speaking we're speaking the same language until we get to a point where you don't think you like what I'm saying. So all of a sudden you don't understand me. So, that's when the Tower of Babel comes up. If you know the story of the Tower of
yeah,
Babel,
yeah.
where people were building something to the sky, and then it was like, no, you can't reach this power, so I will send in different languages to disrupt you. But yeah, of course,
Maybe there's a
it's going
future
to be
episode
difficult.
to talk about that in more detail and with maybe a guest who can
Yes. Oh, but I remember
off.
what I was thinking when
Yes.
you said this, and it was just that to it goes back again to saying it's more than one piece, and you can't make one decision without the other.
Mm.
But in in theory, think about a system where we say instead of funds distribution and setting up committees on funds distribution, we need to set up a system where funds are effectively disseminated across the movement, where where as a movement we place trust in our affiliates and our user groups, and our affiliates and user groups are an extension of the movement and not a burden to it.
Yeah.
And as an extension of the movement and the expansion arm of our movement, we will make sure that these branches are effectively funded and resourced to do the work that is most critical within their countries, within their regions. And it is up to them to determine what that critical work actually is, because impact and results vary depending on where you live, your context, the policies that whether enable or are barriers to your work. And we have and then we have an agreement that in principle we trust you to do this work. But we also know that for every country, there are policies in place that say that if you set up a nonprofit, there are reporting standards, and we will trust those reporting standards if we do need checks and balances. And so you tell us at the end of every year Did you meet, it was a conversation. We trusted you to grow the movement by five more people and they are sustained. Did you grow the
Mm.
movement by five more people and they are sustained? Oh, yes. In fact, I grew the movement by 10 people. Oh, awesome. You did that with $50. Do you still not need those $50? Yes, I do. You can bring 10 more people with $50? Yes. Or, oh, no, actually, I can bring 20 more people into the movement to do XYZ work if I had 55, if I had 60. And we say, fine. So here's your operational cost for the for the next year. Go ye and conquer. Um, we need to trust the extensions of our movement and resource them effectively. And
Yeah.
it was the one thing I struggled with as soon as I understand it. As soon as I understood, as soon as I understood how our movement was resourced, it was the one thing I struggled with. And I remember my first manager at the foundation telling me, yeah, it's been like that for a while. It's going to take a while to change. I kept asking, what does impact mean, first of all, for our movement and in these grants and the grant decisions we're making? And second of all, why am I determining or what impact what impact means? Why are we giving grants? Why? I asked that question so many times. It just I
So you
found
can
it.
control the picture, no? Like, so you can then tell a story of like how the impact like makes people feel good about donating to Wikipedia. No, isn't that the?
Okay.
I'm just making suggestions here. Like I'm not.
I know, but it's like, oh, well, okay. We really need to. I found it the good thing, the culture bit that I really appreciated when I joined the movement was the participatory grant making process, where your proposal's out there and anyone can read your proposal. And
Mm.
anyone can say, I like it, or I don't like it, or there's no value for the funds that, are going into this. So I like that participatory model. And I think it's something we shouldn't lose, even if we move into trust based grant making or trust based resourcing for the movement. We should still keep the open communication. And like I ask hub used to ask hub people, hub folks, don't send in a report, just put everything on Meta, and link to it, because that's the community that needs to know, not me. And we need for the communities to say, yes, this responds to our needs, yes, we agree with this, or we don't agree with this. So we already have a system that holds and keeps our affiliates, our groups, accountable. How effectively and how well we use that system still maybe up in the air, but we need to make sure that system applies across the board, and that as we Philip, I'll stop here. I can
No, it's fine.
agonize.
But
I
like
can
you're right.
agonize
Like,
all day long. I just
and you like
yeah,
how like that accountability isn't performative, but actually meaningful and honest, and like actually
yes,
leading to growth and like being held accountable for the right things instead of like creating this like facade of things that like don't really matter, like are just numbers, but they make like the foundation happy, and that's all you kind of need from them. Like I think that's not a good relationship in a way, and
no,
that's also what we've been talking about. Like for the next year of the C Hub is like because we were promising like, oh, we'll make the application process for you easier, And I responded like, well, we don't need it easier. We just like we need this challenge to like get better at what we do. Like we don't need an easy way out of this like application process. We actually need someone to like spar with us in a way and tell us like okay, or like not tell us, but like just ask us difficult questions that we need to answer and like
yeah,
that we're willing to answer. And
yeah.
right now we just have to ask that of ourselves, and I'm not sure that's the ideal way of doing that necessarily. But anyway, so
One
that's a
step
very
at a
long introduction to that workshop, that 2 hour workshop. Like you'll definitely
time.
hear a lot more about this in the same fashion probably at that workshop. On Thursday of Wikimania, there's also like going to be quite a lot of lightning talks, which are always fun to listen to. Then there's also like one interesting aspect of like how even in big countries, like there are regions like within those countries that are like underdeveloped economically, for example. And there is a session by Leah Lacroix about the south of Italy and how you create active communities in regions where people move away a lot, like where there are hardly any young
Mm.
people, and how
Oh,
that kind of community building can work, or maybe how it doesn't work.
oh, that
Um,
sounds interesting.
yeah, that's common in every country. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it also reflects in, like, for example, what is documented on Wikipedia about that region, especially when it comes to pictures and so on. Like, there's always like a gap in there. So that's definitely like something interesting. And then there are some meetups, and there is a attempt at a trilogue. So that's like a European Union term where like three different groups come together and try to hammer out a deal about something. Yeah, so in the European Union, like it's a European Council. Yes, like the European Council, which is like the member states, the European Commission, which is like the executive body, and then you have the parliament, and all these like those three have to agree on something to make something happen.
Okay.
And we were kind of in the same situation with the ratification process. So maybe this is something that would work better, you know, like, I don't know. We'll see. And right after the trilogue
Wait,
is
wait.
a,
So before
yes.
you move on, who's hosting this? I mean, who's what are the three bodies having this trilogue
So I would
doing?
imagine like it's the affiliates, the communities, and the Wikimedia Foundation having a trilogue about like what's going to
Fascinating.
happen next
That's
with the
interesting.
movement charter or something else. Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
definitely something to attend, because right afterwards is also the movement charter farewell gathering where we say goodbye to the movement charter, and it's also a session where you can bring your own coping mechanism. It could be a song, it could be a wreath, it could be a picture of the movement charter, it could be candles, it could be some mourning like apparel, whatever you feel like bringing.
Oh, that's
Um,
interesting.
it's the part where we kind of say goodbye to it. We'll see if
Okay.
that actually is the actual farewell, but like it does feel like it in many ways.
So members of the drafting commit members of the committee are expected to be there.
Yes, but they didn't organize it. Like this is something that was organized by other people, or will be
Okay.
organized by other people, and it's more like a bring your own stuff
Stuff.
session. Yeah.
So, okay, so I thought of this session as a farewell for the committee, but it sounds like it's a farewell to the movement charter. It's like,
Yes.
well, it is not ratified. It is, so it's like a wake for the charter.
In a way, yes. The original idea would be to do an Irish wake, but there's an alcohol ban at the
I
venue.
love Wikimedians. I love Wikimedians. Okay.
Um, and so there's no Irish wake, but there might be songs.
Oh, shucks.
We'll
For
see.
an
Like
Irish wake, I might have taken a flight. I might have just decided, you know what? I will be there just for the meetup on Thursday.
maybe that will happen afterwards in one of the two karaoke bars in Katowice, um,
Okay.
or somewhere else. Yeah,
All right.
we'll
Okay.
see what the stories are
So
going to
to
be
wait for
from
the
Wikimania.
charter. Yeah. Explanations are good because topics don't always, yeah, headlines don't always tell you the whole
No,
story. I always, when I saw this, I thought, oh, okay, there's going to be a party for the members of the drafting committee. And there was a part of me that was really
that
going
is
to
not
miss
really
that.
our job necessarily, and I'm not sure the foundation is going to do that. To be honest, maybe they'll get a send off like at the opening or closing ceremony. We'll see.
Our
Okay,
movement needs to get better at
saying thank
celebrating.
you. Yes, definitely.
Celebrating the people who do the hard work. We need to get better at it. Yeah, I
Yes,
mean, you may not be happy with what has been done entirely, but appreciate that it has been done. Appreciate that a group of people went through this really difficult task of talking to thousands and translating the voices, the divergent voices of thousands of people. living through the harassments that came with that, living through the pressures and the pain and the emotional roller coasters that they went on. We need to bring them together and say thank you, even if
Yeah.
you're not happy with it. But come
No, there's
on,
always there's always a time afterwards to actually look at the process and see what went wrong and how it went wrong, or like what went well as well, obviously. So yeah, and on Friday we have a open conversation with the Wikimedia Foundation Board of Trustees.
okay,
Let's see how open it really will be, but that might be interesting to listen to, considering like all the emotions involved right now, like with like what the situation is and how the Board of Trustees is essentially like blocking us moving forward. Yeah. Then there's another round of lightning talks in the afternoon on Friday, and then there's the C meetup on Friday evening, which, based on previous Wikimanias, is always like a fun thing to attend, and there might even be a quiz this year. Who knows? Maybe some
oh,
people on this podcast have something to do with that.
ah, okay. We know the people.
Yes,
Thanks for the
they are
heads
known
up.
to us. Um, that is Wikimania. And this podcast will hopefully go up before Wikimania. So you can listen to this while traveling to Wikimania, maybe. Yeah. Thank you, Yop, for this interesting discussion. And I think there's still something left to be discussed about this.
Maybe,
But yeah,
maybe.
we'll see. We'll see if Wikimania changes anything or doesn't. And then we'll be back, maybe talking to a guest for once about their experiences, instead of just our experiences all the time.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. But it has been it's been a bit healing, I guess. It's been part of my healing to express some of these frustrations that I
Yes.
think I've held back on for a bit. Um, but I do look forward to seeing what comes out of Wikimania, and I do hope to hear that we have conversations that move things forward. We didn't get to talk about what next steps might look like, but maybe following Wikimania, we could have a discussion about what those next steps are or might look like based on how things went. What would be the kumbaya moments, and what are people hopeful for into the future?
Yeah.
I'd be yeah.
Yeah. I guess we'll be in the sidelines, like looking in, but I'm sure there are enough talented people there to make something happen.
Yeah, yeah. What? Okay. End of podcast. Let's end the podcast.
Wait, yes, let's end the podcast.
Yes,
Um,
before.
and to finish off the podcast, we have the usual attribution we have to do, and that is the sound that you hear in the beginning at the end of the campfire. That is the file Campfire Sound Ambience on that you can find on Wikimedia Commons under the CC BY 3.0 license, and it's a file created by Glaneur du Son. Good.
Right.
Hope you have a nice weekend and enjoy Wikimania either online or in person, and we'll see you soon.
That's right. And if you've been listening to us, we've shared so much in our podcast today, but we would love to hear from you. So don't forget, you can send us an email. You can send us some thoughts, some feedback, some ideas, some suggestions, even topic suggestions. We are open to that. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. Philip, what's our email again besides catching us on Meta?
So it's wikifireside@gmail.com. It's all one word, like wiki, fire, and side. And yeah, you can reach us there. It will also be something in the show notes. And yeah,
That's right.
that's the
Thank
podcast.
you.
Thank you very much, Yop.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you very much.
So thanks for listening, and we will be back soon with another episode.
That's right. Thank you.
Bye, Yop.
Bye, Philip.